Chinelo Okafor had always tried to be the perfect daughter, the kind her family could be proud of. Every school achievement, every careful decision, every little sacrifice seemed to bounce back as criticism instead of praise. She lived in a small, cozy apartment in Lagos with her 7-year-old daughter, Ifeoma, doing her best to give her child a happy life. What no one knew was that Chinelo was secretly paying the rent for the huge, beautiful house where her father Emeka and stepmother Amara lived. They didn't just take her help for granted. They treated her like she was nothing, mocking her choices, teasing her about her work and constantly comparing her to her step-siblings, who in their eyes could do no wrong. Chinelo stayed quiet, swallowing every insult, every cold remark, hoping that one day they would see how much she had done for them. She thought maybe, just maybe, they would recognize her sacrifices and finally treat her like family. But deep down, a quiet ache had been growing inside her for years. A feeling that no matter how much she gave, it would never be enough. She didn't realize it yet, but the moment when all her patience, pain, and silent strength would finally meet its reckoning was closer than she could imagine. One day, the truth she had kept hidden for so long would change everything, and the people who belittled her would finally see who had really been holding their world together. This version is more vivid, conversational, and emotionally engaging, designed to pull the reader in while keeping the story relatable and viral ready. It was a quiet Sunday evening when Chinelo decided to visit her father's mansion, just like she often did. She carried a bag full of groceries, ready to help with chores, hoping to keep some kind of connection with the family that had never truly appreciated her. Ifeoma skipped alongside her, excited to see her grandparents, completely unaware of the storm waiting inside. Chinelo took a deep breath before stepping through the grand doors, masking her nervousness with a polite smile. She had done this countless times, always careful, always humble, hoping for a kind word or even a glance of acknowledgement. But that evening everything changed. As she began putting the groceries away, her father, Emeka, looked at her with pure disdain. His voice was cold, sharp, and deliberate, cutting through the air like a knife. "You and Ifeoma are nothing but parasites. Move out of my sight," he said, loud enough for her stepmother and step-siblings to hear. The words hit Chinelo harder than she had ever imagined. Her chest tightened, her stomach lurched, and for a moment she felt like the floor might give way beneath her. Her little daughter, Ifeoma, froze, her big eyes welling up with tears, looking at her mother for comfort. Chinelo's heart broke all over again. These were not just words. They were a verdict, a declaration that the love she had carried, the sacrifices she had made, meant nothing to them. She had always hoped that her care, her loyalty, her quiet strength, would earn respect or at least acknowledgement. But now she saw the truth. Her love had been used as leverage, twisted into a tool for humiliation. For the first time, Chinelo felt the full weight of years of silent suffering. Every insult, every comparison, every sneer came rushing back. The irony was unbearable. She had kept their mansion running, paid their bills, supported their comfort, and yet here she was, cast out, branded as worthless. She held Ifeoma close, trying to swallow her own pain to shield her daughter, but the sting lingered. That night, as she walked back to her small apartment with Ifeoma clutching her hand, a fire ignited inside her, a quiet, burning realization that she had been blind for too long, and that the life she deserved could no longer depend on the approval of people who had never truly loved her. What Chinelo's family didn't know was the truth that had quietly fueled their lavish lives for years. Every utility bill, every mortgage payment, every little repair and maintenance cost for the grand mansion her father and stepmother flaunted had come straight from her own bank account. She had worked in silence, never asking for credit, never expecting thanks. She thought that maybe, just maybe, if they saw her sacrifices, they would understand her value, finally recognize the love and effort she had poured into keeping their lives comfortable. While Chinelo struggled to make ends meet in her small apartment with Ifeoma, her father and stepmother lounged in air-conditioned rooms, hosting dinners, inviting friends, living as if nothing in the house came without effort. They treated her like a beggar, mocking her modest apartment, belittling her career choices, comparing her to step-siblings who needed nothing to live well. The irony was bitter and almost unbearable. Every time they laughed at her or scorned her, the money that allowed them that comfort had come from her hard work, her savings, her secret sacrifices. They had no idea that the very woman they called a parasite was the one holding their world together. Chinelo remembered nights when she stayed up late, calculating bills, transferring funds, making sure the electricity stayed on, the water ran, the house remained perfect. She remembered the quiet frustration, the sting of rejection, and the loneliness of giving so much without receiving a shred of gratitude. And yet she had hoped still that her patience and loyalty would someday earn respect. But the more she thought about it now, the more she realized that respect and gratitude were never coming. They were too blind, too selfish, too wrapped up in their own comfort to see her worth. The humiliation of being treated like less than human while secretly funding their lives burned inside her, sharp and raw. It was a bitter lesson. The people who humiliate you can sometimes be the ones benefiting the most from your generosity. Chinello held Ifeoma close and made a silent promise to herself that this story of invisible labor and quiet strength would one day be told, and that she would never let anyone use her love as a weapon again. That night, the rain fell in heavy sheets as Chinello and Ifeoma were forced out of the mansion, their lives packed into a few soaked bags. Her father's security team didn't hesitate. They marched them to the front gate, dumping their belongings on the wet sidewalk as if they were nothing more than trash. Ifeoma clutched her tiny backpack, shivering not just from the cold but from fear, her little face pressed against her mother's side, looking up at Chinello with wide, anxious eyes. Chinello swallowed a sob, tightening her grip on her daughter's hand, and forced herself to stay calm. Inside, her heart was breaking, her blood boiling with a mix of anger and disbelief. Neighbors had begun to gather, some leaning from balconies, some peeking from windows, murmuring among themselves. Chinello could feel their eyes on her, but she didn't let it shake her. Every step down the driveway, every drop of rain soaking through her shoes, every flash of pity or curiosity from the crowd reminded her of a painful truth. This family, the people who were supposed to love and protect her, would never see her as an equal. All the sacrifices, the late nights, the secret payments for their comfort, they didn't matter to them. To them, she and Ifeoma were burdens, parasites to be thrown out without a second thought. But as the shock and humiliation settled into a steady burn, something else grew inside Chinello, a sharp, clear determination. She realized that dignity wasn't something her father or stepmother could give her. She didn't need their approval or their recognition anymore. For years she had hidden her strength behind silence, hoping for love that would never come. Now every insult, every belittling word, every mocking glance had fueled something bigger. This wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming herself, her life, and her power. Chinello held Ifeoma close as the rain soaked them both, and she made a silent vow. This family might have tried to humiliate her tonight, but they could never break her. Their mansion, their sneers, their arrogance, they were nothing compared to the strength she carried inside. One day, she promised herself, they would see just how untouchable she truly was, and the parasite they had thrown out would rise higher than they could ever imagine. Back in her small apartment in Aja, Lagos, Chinello sat by the window with Ifeoma curled up beside her, listening to the rain as it tapped softly against the glass. Each drop seemed to echo the anger and frustration she had carried inside for years. The storm outside mirrored the storm within her, a mix of heartbreak, betrayal, and finally, clarity. She thought about every insult, every mocking remark, every time her father and stepmother had looked down on her as if she were nothing. For so long she had hoped for approval, for recognition, for even the smallest sign that her sacrifices mattered. And for so long she had waited in vain. But tonight something inside her shifted. The years of being overlooked, the sleepless nights paying bills they took for granted, the quiet endurance of humiliation, it all became fuel instead of chains. Chinello realized that she had been providing for them all this time, keeping their world running while being treated like an outsider. And now it hit her. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need their pity, their recognition, or their acceptance. She was capable, resourceful, and strong all on her own. If they couldn't see her worth, that was their loss. For the first time in years, Chinello felt the raw, thrilling edge of empowerment. She could feel it rising inside her, like fire warming every corner of her being. Her pain had taught her lessons they would never understand, and her anger had sharpened her mind. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of hurting anyone. It was about reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. She would take everything she had endured and turn it into power. She would show them that the parasite they mocked, the daughter and mother they disrespected, was smarter, stronger, and untouchable. Chinello looked down at Ifeoma, seeing her daughter's innocence and trust, and felt a protective surge of determination. Ifeoma would never have to feel the sting of being undervalued. Chinello would build a life where they were safe, respected, and proud, not because her family gave her permission, but because she had finally claimed it for herself. That night, in the rhythm of the rain, Chinello understood something simple but profound. Strength is born from struggle, and dignity is something no one can take away unless you allow it. Chinello sat at her small kitchen table, the rain still drumming softly against the window, and began to plan. Every thought was sharp, precise, like a chess game she had waited years to play. She pulled out her phone and started making calls, first to her accountant, then to her lawyer, and finally to a few trusted business partners. She laid everything out. Every bill she had paid, every repair she had funded, every mortgage installment that had kept her father's mansion running. The numbers were staggering, and the more she saw them all written down, the more real it became. She had been quietly supporting a life that had treated her like she was nothing. Her lawyer listened carefully, nodding as Chinello explained how the property had been maintained solely through her contributions. They began to uncover legal loopholes, gaps in the paperwork, oversights in ownership, that could allow her to reclaim the house. For the first time, the thought of confronting her father and stepmother wasn't terrifying. It was empowering. Every hour of silent labor, every sacrifice, every insult she had endured suddenly became ammunition for the truth. At the same time, Chinello began plotting the next step for her own life. Her small catering business had always been her quiet passion, her escape, her source of independence. Over the years she had built connections, learned the industry, and gained loyal clients, all while keeping her focus on surviving her family's cruelty. Now she would expand that business into something bigger, something that could not be ignored. A chain of catering outlets across Lagos. A brand people respected, a name that carried her strength and resilience. She wanted her success to be visible, undeniable, not to show off, but to prove to herself that she didn't need anyone's approval to thrive. Her plan wasn't fueled by hate or revenge. Chinello wanted justice, plain and simple. She wanted the recognition that had been denied for years. The acknowledgement that the parasite they had mocked had been the one quietly holding everything together. And she wanted a future where Ifeoma could grow up safe, respected, and proud of her mother's strength. That night, Chinello felt a sense of calm determination she hadn't known in years. She had a plan, a purpose, and the fire inside her had grown into something unstoppable. The world wasn't going to underestimate her anymore, and she was ready to prove it. Weeks later, Chinello walked up the driveway to her father's mansion, but this time she wasn't the timid, overlooked daughter. She wasn't begging for approval or hiding her sacrifices. She walked with purpose, her heels clicking on the marble, her posture calm and confident. Beside her was her lawyer, and in her bag were documents that could not be ignored. The heavy gates opened, and for the first time she felt the power she had earned, not from anyone's mercy but from her own strength and intelligence. Inside, Emeka and Amara were hosting a small gathering when she arrived. The moment they saw her, their smug expressions froze. They blinked, clearly confused, unsure how to react to the woman who had once been dismissed as nothing. Chinello didn't rush. She stood tall, let her gaze meet theirs, and waited. Then, in a clear, steady voice, she began to lay out the truth. Every utility bill, every mortgage payment, every repair and maintenance expense, they had all been paid by her. Every convenience they enjoyed, every luxury they flaunted, had come from her hard work, her money, her quiet determination. The room grew silent. Amara's lips trembled, Emeka's brow furrowed. The lawyer handed over the neatly organized documents, and Chinello calmly explained the legal steps she had uncovered to reclaim ownership of the house. Their smiles, once so confident and cruel, faltered. The reality was undeniable. The parasite they had mocked, belittled, and thrown out had been the backbone of their comfortable lives all along. Chinello's heart remained steady, but inside she felt a surge of vindication. Every insult, every sneer, every cold word of rejection had led to this moment. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, composed, letting the truth speak louder than any anger could. For years they had underestimated her, treated her like she was worthless, ignored her sacrifices. Now they could see, plainly and uncomfortably, that she was their equal, maybe even their superior in strength, resilience, and intelligence. Chinello looked at her father and stepmother one last time, her expression calm but unyielding. The power dynamics had shifted. She had reclaimed her dignity, her authority, and her voice. The girl they had scorned was no longer invisible. She was unstoppable, untouchable, and finally free. Chinello didn't let what had happened stay behind closed doors. She shared her story with neighbors, relatives, and people in her community, not out of spite, but to teach a lesson about respect, gratitude, and fairness. Everyone listened, some in shock, some in admiration. The tale of how the daughter they had scorned had quietly supported the mansion for years while being humiliated struck a chord. People began talking, spreading the story from street to street, and soon social media amplified it even further. Pictures of Chinello standing elegantly in front of the mansion, holding the legal documents that proved her claim, began circulating online. Her calm composure, her quiet confidence, her poised smile, it told a story louder than any words could. Everyone could see it. The parasite they had mocked was not only strong but unstoppable. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The proud, arrogant faces of Emeka and Amara, who had treated her like nothing, became the subject of whispers, judgments, and gossip. People were stunned that the very woman they dismissed had been the one keeping their lives running all along. Chinello felt a deep sense of relief as the story spread. For the first time, her sacrifices were acknowledged publicly. The humiliation she had endured for years was being turned back on those who had caused it. But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. She wanted everyone to see that exploitation, disrespect, and arrogance had consequences. And in showing her strength, she was reclaiming her dignity in a way that no one could ignore. Her daughter, Ifeoma, watched in awe as her mother stood tall, confident, and unshaken. Chinello had not only reclaimed her family home but also set an example of courage, resilience, and intelligence. She was no longer invisible. She had turned the pain, rejection, and betrayal into power, showing the world, and her family, that no one has the right to belittle the person who quietly holds everything together. By the end of it, Chinello's message was clear. Strength isn't given, it's earned. Respect isn't demanded, it's recognized. And those who think they can exploit others without consequence will eventually face the truth. Chinello had reclaimed her life, her voice, and her dignity, and the world was watching. Within a few months, Chinello's life had transformed completely. Her small catering business, once humble and quiet, had grown into a thriving Lagos-wide brand. Orders came in from all corners of the city, and her team expanded to keep up with demand. People admired not just the food she created, but the story behind it. The woman who had been overlooked and humiliated, yet had risen with strength, determination, and intelligence. Every client, every delivery, every glowing review was a reminder that her hard work, patience, and resilience had paid off. With her newfound success, Chinello bought a beautiful home for herself and Ifeoma. It wasn't just a house. It was a sanctuary filled with love, warmth, and safety. Soft sunlight poured through the windows, laughter echoed in the rooms, and every corner carried the mark of her care and effort. For the first time in years, she felt secure. She didn't have to worry about cruel words, cold looks, or being taken for granted. This was her space, her rules, her life. Ifeoma thrived in school and in her own little world, growing up free from the sting of her extended family's cruelty. She laughed without fear, dreamed without limits, and loved without caution, surrounded by the kind of stability and respect she deserved. Chinello realized something important as she watched her daughter play in the garden. Money and power alone could never give true happiness. The victories that mattered most were not just financial. They were personal. Reclaiming her agency, standing up for herself, protecting her child, and earning respect from those who had once doubted her were far more rewarding than any bank balance. She had turned years of pain into wisdom, humiliation into confidence, and rejection into opportunity. Every day, Chinello felt proud of the life she had built. She had rewritten her story not by tearing others down, but by rising above their cruelty and showing what was possible when strength meets determination. Her triumph wasn't flashy or vengeful. It was real, enduring, and deeply fulfilling. She had created a future where she and Ifeoma could thrive, laugh, and love without fear, proving that true transformation comes not from wealth alone, but from reclaiming your life, your voice, and your dignity. The Okafors tried to reach out, sending messages, calling, even showing up at her new home, hoping to patch things up. But Chinello didn't respond. She had learned the hard way that seeking approval from people who had never respected her was a trap. She chose peace over their toxic attempts at reconciliation. She had built a life where dignity, love, and respect came from herself, not from people who had belittled her for years. From the balcony of her new home, Chinello watched Ifeoma running across the garden, laughing freely, her small arms stretched wide as if embracing the whole world. There was no fear in her eyes, no shame in her smile, just pure joy. Chinello felt a wave of pride and relief wash over her. This was what mattered. A safe, loving space for her daughter, a life built on strength and honesty, and the knowledge that she had finally reclaimed her power. Chinello whispered softly, first to herself, then as if sending a message to the world. The ones who threw you out may call you weak, may try to shame you, but only you can define your worth. And sometimes the parasite is the one feeding the empire. She smiled, feeling the weight of years of struggle lift off her shoulders. Her story wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, empowerment, and the truth that respect cannot be demanded or forced. It must be earned, nurtured, and recognized. As the sun set over Lagos, Chinello stood tall, a mother, a survivor, a woman who had turned betrayal into strength and humiliation into power. Her journey became an emblem for anyone who had been overlooked, undervalued, or mistreated. She had proven that true victory comes not from money or status alone, but from reclaiming your life, protecting your loved ones, and standing unshakably in your own worth. Her story would be remembered and shared, because the world needed to know that strength, dignity, and justice always find a way.